At the two ends of the American continent, separated by 10,000 kilometers of coastline, vast deserts, and the towering spine of the Andes, two vanished peoples once lived their lives according to the rhythm of the ocean. The Periku of Baja California Sur and the Yagan of Tierra del Fuego could hardly have been more distant geographically, and yet, in many profound ways, they mirrored each other. Each was a people of the sea, each lived in an ecological and cultural dead end, and each left behind a story written not in empires or monuments, but in bones, boats, and quiet resilience. These two peoples also may offer echoes of something older, of a deeply ancient, perhaps even pre-Clovis, coastal migration. Though separated by time and climate, the Periku and Yagan were both deeply adapted to their isolated corners of the world, shaped by the constraints and opportunities of their respective marine frontiers. What unites them most is the fact that they lived not just at the edge of geography, but also at the edge of cultural memory. The Periku occupied the far southern tip of the Baja California Peninsula, a land hemmed in by sea and desert. Their territory included the Cape region near modern-day Cabo San Lucas, as well as offshore islands. This arid land is cut off from the Mexican mainland by hundreds of miles of desert, sea and mountains, making it one of the most ecologically and culturally isolated regions in North America. Spanish conquistadors, when they first encountered the Periku, were struck by their distinctiveness, both physically and linguistically. Far to the south, at the opposite extreme of the Americas, lived the Yagan, also known as the Yamana. Their world was the wind-lashed, glacier-carved archipelagos of Tierra del Fuego and Navarino Island, at the tip of South America. No other indigenous group lived farther south. The Yagan inhabited a maze of channels, fjords and icy bays, with Cape Horn and the Drake Passage to the east, and the Beagle Channel cutting across their lands like a blade. Their neighbours, the Selknam and Hausch, occupied the interior, but the Yagan were alone on the sea. In both cases, these peoples lived at a land's end, not only geographically but anthropologically. Cut off from trade routes, surrounded by ecological extremes, and ignored by the great civilizations of Mesoamerica and the Andes, the Periku and Yagan developed in near total isolation for thousands of years. In fact, the Periku of Baja California's nearest Amerindian relatives may be the Yagan of Tierra del Fuego, but we have no DNA to prove this. A recent study found that a mysterious ghost lineage mixed with populations in central Mexico 8,700 years ago, likely originating in the Baja region, and then rapidly moved south along the coast, eventually reaching the Amazon. Baja region was a much greener, wetter environment during the Ice Age, with rapid sea level rise and desertification happening around 9,000 years ago. Both the Periku and the Yagan were boat builders and ocean navigators, and their boats were more than just tools. They were extensions of their bodies, built for survival in hostile waters. The Periku canoes were dugouts, carved from large driftwood logs, redwood, spruce or hardwoods found inland. These boats were strong enough to reach the offshore islands, sometimes over 30 kilometers from the coast. Early Spanish accounts describe Periku paddling with great skill, ferrying goods and people, and even raiding rival groups on nearby shores. The very fact that they colonized these islands shows how central boats were to their identity. Some accounts even suggest they used double-ended canoes, a design that helps maintain direction in high surf, a subtle sign of engineering shaped by generations of ocean travel. The Yagan took seafaring to an even higher level. They built bark canoes, flexible, lightweight, and perfectly suited for the treacherous waters of Tierra del Fuego. These canoes were stitched together from planks of beech trees, sealed with animal fat or moss, and reinforced with a central rib. A fire was often kept burning inside the canoe, nestled in a hearth of stones and clay, one of the many ways the Yagan adapted to the brutal cold. These boats could carry entire families and were stable enough to hunt sea lions and whales with harpoons. Like the Periku, the Yagan viewed their boats not just as transport, but as essential to life. Children were born in them, meals were cooked in them, and elders died in them. In both cultures, boats were not separate from the body. They were the bones of the tribe, floating on the skin of the sea. The Yagan were known for smothering themselves with seal oil to stay warm rather than wearing furs. Charles Darwin encountered them in 1833 and thought they were the missing link in human evolution. Interestingly, the men would fish from the boat while the women rowed, but the women would dive into the ice-cold water to grab oysters and seafood because the men didn't swim. They used bark-covered canoes, similar to what Aboriginal Australians made. The Periku lived in a region rich with marine life. The Gulf of California is one of the world's most biodiverse marine environments, teeming with fish, mollusks, and sea turtles. The Periku adapted to this warm water bounty with an impressive range of tools: shell fishhooks, bone harpoons, and woven nets. They were expert free divers, capable of descending to collect abalone and pearl oysters, and they hunted turtles using sharpened wooden spears hardened in fire. Their diet included grouper, snapper, and mackerel, as well as seabirds and sea lions. They also foraged on land, harvesting cactus fruit, agave, and mesquite pods, but the sea was their true larder. Shell middens, some meters high, testify to thousands of years of continuous occupation. The Yaghan, in contrast, harvested the sea from the edge of an icy abyss. Their waters were home to seals, otters, seabirds, and whales. They hunted sea lions with barbed harpoons and nets, using stealth and precision. They gathered mussels, limpets, and kelp. Like the Periku, they also fished, but their catch was shaped by colder waters: cod, hake, and other southern ocean species. To survive the extreme cold, they needed fat, and the marine mammals of the south provided it. Whale carcasses, when found, were celebrated. The Yaghan would strip them of meat and blubber, using the bones for tools and the sinew for sewing. Their fires burned almost constantly, fed by driftwood and fueled by the greasy remains of sea creatures. Despite the different climates, both peoples demonstrated a mastery of maritime subsistence rarely seen in hunter-gatherer societies. They were not coastal peoples dabbling in fishing. They were ocean cultures, forged by salt and tide. Fishhooks uncovered in Baja and made from shell have been dated to 12,000 years ago, but these were not for fishing in shallow waters. They were specifically for catching deep-water fish. The Periku lived in heat. Baja California Sur is a place of burning sand, harsh sun, and ephemeral water. Their adaptations were those of scarcity, knowledge of springs and seasonal migrations, shelters of woven palm and reed, and a flexible diet that could shift as the tides and seasons demanded. The Yaghan, on the other hand, lived in a world of constant damp and cold. Rain and snow were frequent, and wind was constant. Yet they often went nearly naked, their bodies covered in whale fat to keep out the cold. Instead of clothing, they relied on fire and body heat, staying in low conical huts made of branches and hides, clustered in groves for protection from the wind. The differences are stark, but the solutions were equally ingenious. In the heat of Baja, shade and water dictated survival. In the cold of Tierra del Fuego, fire and fat did. But both groups understood their environment intimately and responded not with conquest, but with cooperation and adaptation. Physically, both groups were described by early European observers as distinct. The Periku were often tall and thin, with long, narrow skulls and projecting faces. Their morphology has been compared to Australo-Melanesian populations, as well as to early South American remains like Lucia and the skulls of Lagoa Santa. Their language was completely unrelated to any neighbouring group. The Periku get their name because of their unique language, which the Spanish said sounded like parakeets. The Yaghan, too, were physically robust and unique. Their bodies were stocky, adapted for the cold, with barrel-shaped chests and strong limbs. Their language was a true isolate. Yamana had no known relatives. Its complexity amazed missionaries and linguists, with an enormous vocabulary tailored to their marine world. A single word might describe not just paddle, but the specific motion of paddling against the wind in rough water. It was a language built for survival at sea. However, these languages now silenced may be more than mere isolates. They may be the last voices of a vanished linguistic family, once spoken along the Pacific coast from Baja to Patagonia. What we see in the Periku and Yaghan may be the fading traces of a Paleo-American substrate, overrun or absorbed by later migrations. Are they remnants of an ancient coastal migration? Genetic studies have revealed an Australasian signal in some ancient South American skeletons, most notably Lagoa Santa and the Botocudo of Brazil. This signal is not found in ancient or modern North American populations. It has led to speculation that a very early wave of humans, carrying ancestral traits shared with Papuans, Aboriginal Australians and Andaman Islanders, entered the Americas along the coast before the Clovis people arrived from the north. Could the Periku and Yaghan be the distant northern and southern echoes of this first migration? Their skull morphology, maritime culture and linguistic uniqueness suggest they could be. Their geographic positions at the endpoints of the continent support this view. Perhaps these were refugia, where an ancient people clung to life in the face of later waves. They could not retreat inland. The deserts of Baja or the glaciers of Patagonia saw to that, so they went to sea, or stayed on the margins, fishing and remembering. The Periku and the Yaghan never met. One lived under the sun, the other under clouds. But both lived on the edge of the world, in places where no one else wanted to live, but where they learned to thrive. Their stories remind us that greatness does not require empires. It can be found in a dugout canoe, in the arc of a spear, in the whisper of sea foam against a shell midden. In both peoples, we see the memory of the first journey, the first long paddle down the unknown coast of a new continent. And though their voices are gone, the sea still speaks for them. The story cannot be told without returning to the Pacific, not as a barrier, but as a corridor. Long before the interior ice sheets opened paths into the Americas, the sea offered a highway lined with islands, kelp forests, and marine life. Though no early boats have been recovered, the archaeological and ethnographic evidence for a Pleistocene maritime migration is both circumstantial and compelling. The American Pacific coast was colonized well before 13,000 years ago because watercraft were already in use in Japan before that time. Even earlier, offshore fishing technologies appear in Indonesia and Japan between 30,000 and 40,000 years ago, strongly implying regular water travel. The region from Indonesia through Taiwan to Japan, a mosaic of islands and narrow channels, served as a training ground for early humans learning to sail and paddle the sea. From there, it is plausible that they moved northward along the Kurile Islands, assisted by post-glacial warming between 30,000 and 33,000 years ago, when improved ocean productivity and expanding kelp ecosystems may have lured people along the rim of the Pacific. Even if boats made of wood or hide haven't survived, due to poor preservation conditions and inundated coastal sites, their presence is inferred from island archaeology. Stone tools and bones on offshore islands that could only have been reached by boat. And while science reads the sediments and radiocarbon dates, First Nations oral traditions have long held the memory of what the land and sea once were. One of the most evocative pieces of anecdotal evidence comes from the Heiltsuk oral tradition of British Columbia, recorded in 1898. As one elder told, "In the beginning there was nothing but water and ice and a narrow strip of shoreline." This line, handed down through generations, may encode a memory of the last deglaciation, when retreating glaciers exposed just a sliver of land between towering ice walls and the pounding sea. The Heiltsuk territory along the central coast of British Columbia, rich with fjords and uplifted beaches, was one of the first regions to emerge from under the ice, and one of the first to be reoccupied. Stories like these may preserve folk memories of a landscape in flux, the liminal world of the terminal Pleistocene, where people clung to narrow shorelines while watching both the glaciers retreat and the forests return.